My 17-year-old sister accused me of theft to cover her drug habit. The detective slid the evidence bag across the metal table. Inside was my grandmother's diamond ring, the one that had been missing for 3 months. The one Lily swore I'd stolen. I stared at it through the plastic, watching it catch the fluorescent light, and felt something crack inside my chest. Detective Raymond Foster leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, studying my face. He'd been working theft cases for 19 years, and his expression told me he'd seen this pattern before. The ring had been found in a pawn shop downtown, pawned by someone using my driver's license. Security footage showed a person wearing my jacket, my height, entering at 2:17 p.m. on a Thursday. I'd been at work. The timestamp was clear. The figure's face was obscured by a baseball cap, but everyone believed it was me. My own mother had called the police. My father wouldn't look at me during family dinners that turned into interrogations. Lily had cried so convincingly when she accused me, her hands shaking as she described catching me sneaking into Mom's jewelry box. I'd been 24 years old, working 2 jobs to save for a house, living in the basement apartment of our family home to help with bills. None of that mattered once Lily started crying. I'd been living in my parents' basement for 18 months when Lily started acting strange. She'd always been the golden child, straight A's, student council president, volleyball captain. I was the older brother who'd taken community college classes while working full-time, practical but unremarkable. Our parents made it clear which child made them prouder. I didn't mind. Lily and I had been close growing up. She'd text me for advice about boys, school drama, friend problems. I'd pick her up from parties when she needed a ride. No questions asked. That trust made what happened next so much worse. The first sign something was wrong came on a Saturday morning in March. I'd gotten home from my night shift at the warehouse around 6 a.m. and found Lily in the kitchen, pupils dilated, jaw clenching rhythmically. She jumped when she saw me, spilling orange juice across the counter. Her hands shook as she wiped it up. When I asked if she was okay, she snapped that I needed to mind my own business and stop acting like her father. The hostility was new, sharp, wrong. I told myself she was stressed about college applications and let it go. I should have pushed harder. 2 weeks later, Mom's prescription painkillers went missing. She'd had back surgery the previous month and kept the pills in the master bathroom medicine cabinet. The bottle had contained 30 tablets. She'd taken maybe 5. When she went to take her evening dose, the bottle was empty. Mom gathered the family in the living room that night, her face tight with pain and suspicion. She asked directly if anyone had taken them. Lily immediately accused me. She said she'd seen me coming out of their bathroom 2 days earlier, acting nervous. My stomach dropped. I had been in their bathroom, but only to grab toilet paper because the basement bathroom had run out. I tried to explain, but Lily's eyes filled with tears. She said she didn't want to believe it, but she'd noticed me acting strange lately, coming home at odd hours, being secretive. Mom and Dad exchanged a look that made my chest tighten. They wanted to believe me, but Lily was 17, their baby girl. Why would she lie? I could see them doing the mental math, weighing their children against each other. The pills never turned up. Mom got a new prescription and started locking her bedroom door. The incidents escalated. Dad's wallet went missing from his car in the driveway. He found it 3 days later shoved under the driver's seat, empty except for his license and insurance card. $200 in cash gone. Then Mom's credit card was used at a gas station 30 miles away while she was at work. Small charges, 20s and 30s, for gas and convenience store items. The bank flagged it as fraud and issued a new card. Each time something happened, Lily had an explanation that pointed toward me. She'd seen me near Dad's car that morning. She'd heard me on the phone talking about needing money. She was always nearby when discoveries were made, ready with observations that seemed helpful, but built a case against me. I started to feel paranoid in my own home. I installed a lock on my basement door. I kept receipts for everything. I wrote down my work schedule and whereabouts obsessively, but the evidence kept mounting in ways I couldn't explain. The morning everything exploded started normally enough. I'd just finished a double shift and was planning to sleep until noon. Instead, Mom woke me at 8:30 a.m., her face pale and drawn. She asked me to come upstairs. Her voice had a flatness to it that made my skin prickle. In the living room, I found Dad standing by the fireplace, and Lily curled up on the couch, crying silently into a tissue. Mom sat down beside Lily and put an arm around her shoulders. Then she told me that Grandma's diamond ring was missing. The ring had been passed down through 3 generations, worth maybe $15,000, but priceless in sentimental value. Mom had shown it to Lily the previous weekend, discussing plans to give it to her when she graduated. Now the small velvet box sat empty in Mom's jewelry drawer. Lily had discovered it that morning while borrowing earrings. She'd run downstairs in tears to tell our parents, and she'd told them something else. She claimed she'd caught me in their bedroom 2 nights ago, going through Mom's jewelry box. She said she'd been getting water from the kitchen around midnight when she heard noises upstairs. She'd gone to investigate and found me crouched by Mom's dresser, the jewelry box open. When I'd noticed her, I'd allegedly threatened her, told her if she said anything, I'd make sure everyone knew about her sneaking out to see her boyfriend. She said she'd been too scared to tell anyone until the ring went missing. My mouth went dry. I'd been at work that night, covering someone's shift from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. I told them this. I could show them my time card. I could give them the name of my supervisor who'd been there the entire shift. Dad's face flickered with something that might have been relief, but Mom looked at Lily. Lily shook her head, fresh tears streaming down her face. She said she must have gotten the night mixed up. Maybe it was 3 nights ago, or 4. She'd been so upset she couldn't remember exactly when, but she knew what she saw. She described my ratty gray sweatshirt, the one I wore constantly. She described the way I'd jerked around when I'd heard her, how my eyes had looked in the dim light. The details were too specific to be made up, too specific to be a mistake. Mom asked if I had the ring. I said no. She asked if I'd taken anything else. I said no. She asked why Lily would lie about something like this. I had no answer that didn't sound defensive and weak. Dad suggested we call the police and let them sort it out. If I was innocent, I had nothing to worry about. If I'd made a mistake, it was better to come clean now. The way he said mistake made it clear what he believed. Detective Foster arrived that afternoon with a younger partner, Officer Jenna Hartley. She'd been on the force for 6 years and took notes while Foster asked questions. They interviewed each of us separately. When it was my turn, I sat in the dining room and went through everything methodically. My work schedule, my lack of access to Mom's room since she'd started locking it, my confusion about why Lily would accuse me. Foster listened without expression, his weathered face giving nothing away. He asked about my financial situation. I admitted I was saving money but had no major debts or urgent needs. He asked if I used drugs. I said no. He asked if I'd consent to a voluntary search of my room. I agreed immediately, desperate to prove my innocence. They found nothing in my basement apartment. No jewelry, no stolen items, no evidence of drug use or gambling debts. Nothing that explained why I would need to steal from my family. When they interviewed Lily, I heard her crying through the floor. The sound carried through the heating vents. She sobbed that she didn't want to get me in trouble. She loved her brother, but she knew what she'd seen. She was scared of me now, scared of what I might do if she kept talking. The manipulation was masterful. By the time the police left, I was the threat, and she was the traumatized witness trying to do the right thing. Over the next week, I became a stranger in my own home. Mom and Dad spoke to me in careful, measured tones. They suggested I might want to look for my own place, not because they were kicking me out, they stressed, but because the situation was stressful for everyone. Lily was having nightmares. She'd started seeing the school counselor. Having me in the house was making her recovery harder. I started apartment hunting with money I'd been saving for a down payment. Every listing felt like an admission of guilt. I'd catch Mom watching me sometimes with this wounded, confused expression, like she was trying to reconcile the son she'd raised with the thief she now believed I'd become. Dad stopped making eye contact entirely. My younger cousin Avery called me one evening. She'd heard something was going on with the family but didn't have details. I gave her a vague explanation about a misunderstanding. She pushed for more information. When I finally told her about the accusations, she went quiet. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. Lily had asked her for money 2 weeks ago. $300, claimed it was for a school trip. Avery had loaned it to her. Lily still hadn't paid it back. I drove to Avery's apartment that night. She was 26, worked as a paralegal, and had always been close with Lily. She showed me the Venmo transaction on her phone, dated 3 weeks prior. $300 sent to Lily's account with a note that said, "Europe trip. Will pay back soon." I asked Avery what Lily had told her about the trip. Avery explained that Lily had claimed her school was offering a summer exchange program to France. She needed money for the deposit, but didn't want to ask our parents because they'd been stressed about bills. She'd promised to pay Avery back with money from her part-time job at the grocery store. I asked Avery if she'd mentioned this to Mom and Dad. She hadn't. It was supposed to be a secret. I pulled up our high school's website on my phone and found the international programs page. No France trip scheduled for that summer. No exchange programs available to juniors at all. Avery's face went pale as she read over my shoulder. She asked what this meant. I didn't have an answer yet, but the pieces were starting to shift into a different pattern, a worse pattern. I asked Avery not to mention anything to Lily. I needed to figure out what was really happening first. She agreed reluctantly, but I could see the doubt creeping into her expression. Doubt about Lily, not about me. It was the first time anyone had looked at this situation and questioned my sister instead of me. I started watching Lily more carefully, not stalking her, just paying attention in ways I hadn't before. She'd been my little sister, someone I'd trusted implicitly. Now I watched her like she was a stranger. I noticed the weight loss, maybe 15 pounds in a few months. Her collarbones jutted out sharply. She'd always been athletic, but this was different, gaunt. She'd started wearing long sleeves constantly, even as the weather warmed up. When she came home from school, she'd go straight to her room and blast music. Our parents thought she was giving me space, being considerate. I thought she was hiding something. One evening, I waited until she left for her shift at the grocery store, then went upstairs. Her room door was locked, but I had the same key from when we were kids, and all the interior doors used the same locks. My hand shook as I opened her door. I'd never violated her privacy like this before, but she'd violated my entire life, so I pushed past the guilt and went inside. Her room was unusually messy. Lily had always been organized, but now clothes piled on her desk chair and textbooks lay scattered across her floor. I looked through her desk drawers carefully, making sure to remember where everything belonged, so I could replace it exactly. In the bottom drawer, I found a shoebox pushed toward the back. Inside were credit card statements in Mom's name, old ones from before Mom had reported the fraud, charges at gas stations, convenience stores, but also charges I didn't recognize, a place called Riverside Recovery, another called Next Gen Wellness Center. I took photos of everything with my phone, hands shaking so badly the first few shots came out blurred. Under the credit card statements I found receipts, cash receipts from a pawn shop on the east side of town. 4 different transactions over the past 3 months. Small items at first, a gold bracelet for $80, a pair of earrings for $60, then larger items, a ring for $300. The description matched Grandma's diamond ring. The date was 1 week after it had gone missing. The receipt included a transaction number and the name of the clerk who'd processed it. I photographed everything, my heart pounding so hard I felt dizzy. I put the shoebox back exactly as I'd found it, and left Lily's room, locking the door behind me. I went down to my basement apartment and sat on my bed, staring at the photos on my phone. The evidence was damning, but I needed to understand why. What was Riverside Recovery? What was Next Gen Wellness Center? I Googled both names. Riverside Recovery was a substance abuse treatment facility. Next Gen Wellness Center was a Suboxone clinic for opioid addiction. My 17-year-old sister had been receiving addiction treatment without anyone knowing. She'd been stealing from the family to fund a drug habit that had apparently gotten serious enough to require medical intervention. The next morning, I drove to the pawn shop on the east side. It was a small operation wedged between a check-cashing place and a liquor store. Inside, a heavy-set man with a gray beard sat behind bulletproof glass, reading a newspaper. I showed him the receipt on my phone and asked if he remembered the transaction. He barely glanced at it before shaking his head. Too many transactions, too many faces. I asked if he kept security footage. He said 30 days, then it recorded over. This transaction was 3 months old, but he did keep copies of the IDs used for pawning items. It was state law. I asked if he could check what ID had been used for this transaction number. He disappeared into a back room for several minutes. When he returned, he slid a photocopy under the glass. It was my driver's license. Someone had pawned Grandma's ring using a photocopy of my ID. The image was slightly blurry, clearly a copy of a copy, but good enough to fool a pawnshop clerk checking it against a database. I asked if the security footage from that day was gone. He confirmed it was. I asked if he remembered anything unusual about the transaction. He scratched his beard, thinking. Then he said the person who'd come in had seemed young, really young. He'd checked the ID twice because the customer had seemed nervous, but the ID had matched the face well enough. It was a guy, definitely, wearing a jacket and a baseball cap. Average height, thin build. He'd accepted the ID at face value because the customer had known exactly what they were doing, acted like they'd done it before. I asked if I could have a copy of the ID photocopy. He said he'd need a police request for that. I thanked him and left, my mind racing. Lily was 5'6", thin, with long hair, but if she'd tucked her hair under a baseball cap and worn baggy clothes, she could have passed for a young man. My younger brother Theo was 19 and built similarly, but Theo was away at college, 3 hours away. He had no reason to steal from the family and no access to Mom's bedroom, unless Lily had recruited him somehow, or unless Lily had disguised herself. I drove to Next Gen Wellness Center next. The clinic was in a medical building near the hospital. I went inside and approached the reception desk. A tired-looking woman in scrubs asked how she could help. I asked if they had a patient named Lily here. She said she couldn't give out patient information. I explained that I was her brother, that she was a minor, and that I was concerned about her safety. The receptionist's expression softened slightly, but she maintained that privacy laws prevented her from confirming or denying anything. She suggested I speak with our parents or contact the clinic director with proper documentation. I left feeling frustrated, but more certain that Lily had been receiving treatment here. The pieces were forming a picture I hadn't wanted to see. I called Detective Foster from my car and asked if I could meet with him. He agreed to see me that afternoon. At the police station, I showed him everything. The photos from Lily's room, the pawn shop receipt, the photocopy of my ID that had been used, the credit card statements, the addresses of the treatment centers. Foster's expression shifted as he reviewed the evidence, hardening into something focused and serious. He asked how I'd obtained these photos. I admitted I'd searched Lily's room without permission. He said that could complicate things legally, but the evidence itself was concerning enough to warrant further investigation. He asked if I'd confronted Lily. I said no. I wanted to go through proper channels. I'd been accused of theft, and I wanted my name cleared through official channels, not family drama. Foster made several phone calls while I waited. He spoke to someone at the pawn shop, confirming the transaction and requesting copies of the documentation. He contacted the treatment centers, but hit the same privacy walls I had. Without a warrant or parental permission, they couldn't release patient information. But the silence itself was telling. They didn't deny Lily was a patient. They simply refused to confirm anything. Foster told me he'd need to speak with Lily directly. He'd also need to speak with my parents and get their permission to access her medical records if she was indeed receiving addiction treatment as a minor. That evening, Detective Foster came to our house again. This time he asked to speak with my parents and Lily together. I was asked to wait in my basement apartment. I sat at the bottom of the stairs, listening to muffled voices through the ceiling. At first, the conversation was calm. Then Mom's voice rose sharply. A door slammed. Lily started screaming. The words weren't clear, but the pitch and intensity were obvious. She was furious or terrified or both. Dad's voice rumbled, trying to mediate. More screaming from Lily, then silence. The kind of silence that presses down on your eardrums. Footsteps crossed the floor above me. The front door opened and closed. More footsteps. Then Mom was at the top of my basement stairs, calling my name. Her voice sounded hollow. I came up to find Dad sitting on the couch with his head in his hands. Lily was nowhere to be seen. Detective Foster stood by the door, his expression grim. Mom asked me to sit down. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past hour. Her eyes were red and swollen. She said Foster had shown them the evidence I'd found. The receipts, the statements, everything. They'd confronted Lily about the treatment centers. She'd denied everything at first. Then she'd broken down completely. Lily had admitted to stealing the ring and pawning it. She'd admitted to stealing the prescription painkillers, the cash from Dad's wallet, the credit card charges. She'd been taking pills recreationally for almost a year, something that started at parties and escalated into a daily habit. When she couldn't get pills anymore, she'd started buying heroin from someone at school. The treatment center charges were for a Suboxone program she'd enrolled herself in 2 months ago, trying to get clean without anyone finding out. She'd been terrified of our parents discovering her addiction. When Mom had started asking questions about the missing painkillers, Lily had panicked. She'd blamed me to deflect suspicion. Once she'd started lying, she couldn't stop. Each new theft required another lie to cover the previous one. The accusation about me going through the jewelry box had been completely fabricated. She'd pawned the ring herself, using a photocopy of my ID she'd made when I'd left my wallet on the kitchen counter. She'd worn my clothes and a baseball cap to make herself look masculine from behind. The security footage had been grainy enough that the pawn shop clerk hadn't looked too closely. She'd planned to say the ring was lost if anyone asked, but Mom had discovered it missing before Lily could establish that narrative. So she'd escalated the accusations against me instead. Mom was crying as she explained this, her voice breaking on almost every sentence. Dad looked broken, staring at the floor. Detective Foster confirmed that Lily had given a full statement at the station. She'd admitted to everything. She was being taken to a juvenile assessment center for evaluation. Given her age and the addiction issues, the charges would likely be handled through family court rather than criminal court, but there would be consequences. Restitution would need to be paid for the stolen items. Lily would need to complete an intensive treatment program. There would be a record. Foster looked at me and said he was sorry. The investigation into me would be formally closed. My name would be cleared in the police records, but the damage to my family would take longer to repair. He left shortly after, leaving us in the wreckage of what we'd discovered. I sat in the living room with my parents, none of us speaking. Finally, Dad asked me why I hadn't come to them when I'd found the evidence. I told him the truth, because they'd believed her over me, because I'd needed proof that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. Because I'd been living in my own home like a criminal for months, and I was tired of defending myself without being believed. Mom broke down completely then. She apologized over and over, words tumbling out between sobs. She said she'd failed both of her children. She'd failed me by not believing me, and she'd failed Lily by not seeing the signs of addiction. Dad pulled her close, and they held each other while I sat across from them, feeling oddly disconnected from the scene. The vindication I'd expected to feel didn't come. Instead, there was just exhaustion and a deep sadness for what my family had become. Lily returned home 3 days later, subdued and pale. She'd been evaluated by a psychiatrist and placed on an outpatient treatment program. She'd have to attend daily group therapy, submit to random drug tests, and complete community service hours. She'd also been expelled from school for the remainder of the year. She'd have to finish her junior year through an alternative program. When she saw me in the kitchen that first morning back, she stopped in the doorway. We stared at each other for a long moment. Then she whispered that she was sorry. I asked if she'd meant any of it, or if sorry was just another manipulation. She flinched like I'd slapped her. She said she'd been high or sick or desperate for every accusation she'd made. She'd known it was wrong, but stopping had seemed impossible. The drugs had made everything else disappear, and when they'd worn off, the guilt had been too heavy to carry. So she'd created a version of reality where I was the problem and she was the victim trying to protect the family. It had been easier than facing what she'd become. I asked her why she'd picked me. Of all people, why had she chosen to destroy her own brother? Lily's face crumpled. She said I'd been the safest target. I lived in the house, so I had access. I was old enough to have independence, but young enough that our parents still saw me as someone who might make mistakes. And most importantly, she'd known I loved her enough that I wouldn't immediately retaliate. She'd counted on me being understanding even while being accused. She'd weaponized our relationship. She'd calculated that our parents would believe their struggling teenage daughter over their stable adult son. She'd been right. I told her I didn't forgive her. Not yet, maybe not ever. She nodded and left the room without argument. Over the following weeks, our family tried to rebuild something from the wreckage. Mom and Dad enrolled in family therapy sessions with someone who specialized in addiction and family trauma. Dr. Vivian Ashford had practiced for 23 years and had a calm, direct manner that cut through the emotional chaos. She met with each of us individually first, then together as a family. The sessions were brutal. We had to confront how quickly the family had turned on me. how Lily's golden child status had made her accusations more believable, how the communication in our family had been broken long before the addiction revealed itself. Dr. Ashford explained that addiction rewires the brain's reward and decision-making systems. Lily had likely started using to cope with pressure and anxiety, then found herself trapped by chemical dependency. That didn't excuse the lies and the theft, but it provided context. Lily wasn't a monster. She was a sick kid who'd made catastrophic choices while in crisis. Mom struggled with this framework. She wanted to be angry at Lily for what she'd done to me, but she also wanted to protect her daughter from the consequences of addiction. Dr. Ashford told her she could do both. Anger and compassion could coexist. Holding Lily accountable was part of helping her recover. Enabling her or minimizing what she'd done would only feed the disease. Dad mostly stayed quiet during these sessions, his face drawn and tired. He'd aged noticeably. The stress had carved new lines around his eyes and mouth. When he did speak, it was usually to ask what he could have done differently. Dr. Ashford told him the past couldn't be changed. The only thing that mattered now was how we moved forward, whether we chose healing or let the betrayal calcify into permanent separation. I moved out 6 weeks after the truth came out, not because I was being forced out, but because I needed space. I'd found a small apartment closer to my jobs, a 1-bedroom with a decent kitchen and parking. Mom cried when I packed my things. She asked if I was leaving because of her. I told her I was leaving because I was 24 years old and needed to live my own life. That was true, but only partially. I also needed distance from the house where I'd been treated like a criminal, from the bedroom where Lily had plotted to destroy my reputation, from the dinner table where I'd sat silently while my family decided I was a thief. I needed to rebuild my sense of self somewhere that wasn't saturated with that experience. My parents helped me move, carrying boxes in silence. Lily stayed in her room. When we were done, Dad hugged me in the parking lot. He said he was proud of me for how I'd handled everything. He said he was sorry for not being the father I'd deserved during the worst of it. I told him I understood. I wasn't sure I did, but it seemed like the right thing to say. Mom gave me a check for $5,000. She said it was for everything I'd spent on therapy, legal consultations, and moving costs. Also for the 18 months of rent I'd paid while living in their basement. I tried to refuse it, but she insisted. It was the least they could do. Lily's recovery was messy and non-linear. She'd have good weeks where she attended all her sessions and tested clean. Then she'd have setbacks, relapse, disappear for a day or two before coming home sick and ashamed. Each relapse sent Mom into a spiral of anxiety and Dad into silent, helpless rage. I kept my distance, but stayed informed. Avery would update me occasionally. She'd visit Lily sometimes, trying to be supportive without being an enabler. She told me Lily talked about me in therapy, about the guilt, about wishing she could undo everything, about not knowing how to face me. I told Avery I wasn't ready for reconciliation. I was still working through my own anger and betrayal. My new therapist, Dr. Kenneth Laurent, helped me process what had happened. He'd worked with trauma survivors for 16 years and specialized in family betrayal cases. He explained that what I'd experienced was a form of emotional abuse. Being falsely accused by someone you trust creates a specific type of trauma. You question your own judgment, your perception of reality, your worth in the eyes of people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. The betrayal isn't just about the false accusation. It's about everyone who believed the accusation without question. I spent months working through that with Dr. Laurent. 4 months after I moved out, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was a woman named Diana Brennan, an investigative journalist with the local newspaper. She was working on a story about prescription drug abuse among teenagers and how families were handling addiction. Someone had mentioned my family's situation as an example of how addiction can destroy trust and fracture relationships. She wanted to interview me. I asked who had mentioned my family. She said she couldn't reveal her sources, but assured me everything would be anonymous if I agreed to participate. I told her I'd think about it. That evening I called Mom and asked if she'd spoken to any journalists. She said no. I called Dad. Same answer. I called Avery. She admitted she'd mentioned our family situation to a friend who was in a support group for families dealing with addiction. That friend must have talked to someone else, and word had eventually reached Diana Brennan. I was furious. Avery apologized repeatedly, saying she'd only mentioned it in the context of how hard recovery was for everyone involved. She hadn't meant for it to become a news story. I told her it was fine, but asked her not to share our family's business anymore. She agreed, clearly upset with herself. I called Diana Brennan back and agreed to the interview under strict conditions. Complete anonymity for everyone involved. No identifying details. Nothing that could be traced back to my family. She agreed. We met at a coffee shop downtown. Diana was in her mid-40s, sharp-eyed and direct. She recorded our conversation on her phone after I signed a consent form. I told her everything. The accusations, the evidence, the discovery, the betrayal. I talked about living under suspicion in my own home, about how quickly family bonds could break when trust eroded, about how addiction doesn't just hurt the addict. It radiates outward, damaging everyone in its path. Diana listened intently, asking clarifying questions, but mostly letting me talk. At the end, she asked how I felt about Lily now. I told her the truth. I was angry, hurt, and sad. I grieved the relationship we'd had before addiction twisted her into someone I didn't recognize, but I also understood she'd been sick. That didn't absolve her of responsibility, but it complicated my feelings. I couldn't simply hate her, but I couldn't forgive her either. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Diana thanked me and said the article would run in about 3 weeks. She'd send me a draft before publication to make sure I was comfortable with how my story was presented. The article ran on a Sunday in late October. It was part of a larger series about the opioid epidemic's impact on families. My story was one of several, all anonymous, all devastating. Diana had done a good job of capturing the complexity without sensationalizing the trauma. I read it 3 times, looking for any detail that might identify us. I found none. The response to the series was significant. Local politicians started talking about funding for teen addiction services. Schools implemented new drug awareness programs. The newspaper's comment section filled with people sharing their own stories of addiction, betrayal, and recovery. Some commenters were sympathetic. Others blamed the families for not seeing the signs sooner. A few suggested that addicts didn't deserve forgiveness or support. The variety of reactions was sobering. There was no consensus on how to handle these situations. Every family had to find their own path through the wreckage. Mom called me after reading the article. She'd recognized our story immediately, despite the anonymity. She said reading it from an outside perspective had helped her understand how badly she'd failed me. She asked if we could have dinner together, just the 2 of us. I agreed. We met at a quiet restaurant on the edge of town. Mom looked smaller somehow, diminished by guilt and stress. We ordered food neither of us ate much of. She apologized again, more specifically this time. She apologized for believing Lily without questioning her story, for making me feel like a stranger in my own home, for prioritizing her fear of Lily's supposed trauma over my actual trauma, for taking weeks to even consider that I might be telling the truth. She said she'd been a terrible mother during those months, and she understood if I couldn't forgive her. I told her I was working on forgiveness, but it was a process. I couldn't just flip a switch and make everything okay. The damage was real. The betrayal had changed how I saw our family and my place in it, but I was willing to keep trying if she was. She cried then, quietly and without drama. She said she'd do whatever it took to rebuild my trust. She asked what I needed from her. I thought about it for a long moment. Then I told her I needed her to stop trying to force a reconciliation between Lily and me. I needed her to respect that I wasn't ready for that, and might never be. I needed her to acknowledge that her relationship with me was separate from her relationship with Lily, and that protecting Lily's feelings couldn't come at the expense of my healing. Mom nodded and agreed. It was a start. Dad reached out a few days later. He asked if I wanted to go to a basketball game with him, something we used to do regularly before everything fell apart. I agreed. We sat in the stadium, eating overpriced hot dogs and watching the game, barely talking. During halftime, Dad said he'd been going to therapy individually. Dr. Ashford had recommended it. He'd been working through his guilt about not protecting me from the accusations, about choosing to stay neutral instead of defending me when I'd needed him most. He said he'd thought he was being fair by not taking sides, but he'd actually been abandoning me. A father's job was to stand up for his child when they were being wrongly accused. He'd failed. He asked if I could ever trust him again. I told him the same thing I'd told Mom. I was trying, Time would tell if we could rebuild what had been broken. He seemed to accept that. We watched the second half in companionable silence. The home team won by 12 points. On the drive home, Dad asked if I'd consider coming to family dinner next week. I said I'd think about it. I wasn't ready to sit across a table from Lily yet, but I understood the invitation wasn't really about dinner. It was about slowly knitting our family back together, one uncomfortable meal at a time. 6 months after the truth came out, Lily completed her outpatient program. She'd been clean for 90 days and had passed all her random drug tests. She'd finished her junior year through the alternative program and earned decent grades. She'd be able to return to regular school for senior year if she stayed clean. She'd also gotten a part-time job at a bookstore, saving money to eventually pay Mom and Dad back for the stolen items and the treatment costs. By all accounts, she was doing well, but I still wasn't ready to see her. Mom asked me several more times to come to family dinner, to give Lily a chance to apologize in person. I kept declining. Finally, Lily sent me a letter, an actual handwritten letter delivered to my apartment. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity won. The letter was 3 pages long, written in Lily's careful handwriting. She started by saying she knew I didn't owe her forgiveness. She knew I might never forgive her. She understood that was a consequence she'd have to live with, but she wanted me to know what she'd learned in treatment, about how the drugs had changed her brain chemistry, making her paranoid and desperate, about how she'd created elaborate justifications for her behavior, convincing herself that I'd somehow understand or that the ends justified the means, about how she'd targeted me specifically because she'd known I loved her and wouldn't immediately destroy her in retaliation. She wrote about her guilt, about waking up every morning and remembering what she'd done to me, about attending family therapy sessions where Mom and Dad talked about the son they'd lost, the family unit that had been shattered, about realizing that even if she stayed sober for the rest of her life, she'd never be able to undo the damage. She could only try to be someone worthy of eventual forgiveness, knowing she might never receive it. The letter ended with an apology that felt more genuine than anything she'd said in person. She wrote that she was sorry for stealing from me in a way that was more profound than taking physical objects. She'd stolen my safety, my family's trust in me, my sense of being loved unconditionally. Those things couldn't be pawned or recovered. They were gone, destroyed by her lies. She understood that. She hoped that someday I'd be willing to at least see her, to let her apologize face to face. But if that day never came, she'd understand that too. She signed it simply, Lily. I read the letter 3 times, then I put it in a drawer and didn't respond. I wasn't ready. 8 months after everything exploded, I showed up to family dinner unannounced. Mom answered the door with wide, surprised eyes. She pulled me into a tight hug before I could say anything. Dad came to the door next, clapping me on the shoulder. Inside, I found the table set for 4. Lily was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove. She turned when she heard my voice and went very still. We stared at each other across the kitchen island. She looked healthier than she had in years. Weight restored, color in her face, clarity in her eyes. But there was also a wariness there, an understanding that she couldn't assume anything about my presence. I asked if there was room for one more at dinner. Mom immediately said yes, rushing to get another place setting. Lily asked if I wanted water or tea. I said water was fine. We moved around each other carefully, like dancers learning a new choreography. No one mentioned the months of silence or the letter. We sat down to dinner and made awkward small talk about my job, Dad's recent golf game, Mom's book club, normal family topics that felt strange after everything that had happened. Halfway through the meal, Lily set down her fork and looked at me directly. She said she knew I probably didn't want to do this at dinner, but she needed to say something. She'd been practicing with her therapist, and if she didn't say it now, she might lose her nerve. I told her to go ahead. She took a breath and apologized. Not the general, tearful apologies from before. This was specific and detailed. She apologized for stealing from the family and blaming me, for creating an elaborate lie that destroyed my reputation and relationships, for weaponizing our parents' love for her to make me look like a threat, for every moment I'd spent under suspicion, every doubt that had been planted about my character, every time I'd had to defend myself to people who should have believed me automatically. She said she'd been a coward and a manipulator. The drugs had lowered her inhibitions and scrambled her judgment, but they hadn't made her lie. She'd chosen to lie. She'd chosen me as her target. Those were her decisions, and she'd live with the consequences. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She just wanted me to know that she understood the full scope of what she'd done, that she'd carry that understanding for the rest of her life. The table was silent after she finished. Mom had tears running down her face. Dad stared at his plate. I looked at Lily and saw something I hadn't seen before. Not the golden child, not the addict, not even my sister, just a person who'd made terrible choices and was trying to become someone different, someone better. I told her I appreciated the apology. I told her I wasn't ready to forgive her yet, but I was willing to try to rebuild something. Not the relationship we'd had before, that was gone, but maybe something new, built on honesty instead of assumed trust. She nodded, accepting the conditional nature of what I was offering. We finished dinner in a more relaxed silence. After we cleared the table, Lily asked if she could show me something. She led me up to her room. It looked completely different. The clutter was gone. The walls were painted a soft blue instead of the dark purple she'd had before. Posters of recovery sayings hung where band posters used to be. On her desk was a journal with my name on the cover. She handed it to me and explained that her therapist had suggested she keep a journal of all the things she wanted to say to me, but couldn't. All the apologies, the explanations, the memories of who we'd been before she'd destroyed everything. She'd been writing in it almost daily for 6 months. She wanted me to have it if I wanted to read it. If not, she'd understand that too. I took the journal home with me that night, but didn't open it for 3 days. When I finally did, I found myself reading for hours, page after page of Lily's handwriting, documenting her journey through early recovery, the withdrawal symptoms, the cravings, the shame spirals, but also her memories of our childhood, times I'd protected her from bullies, helped her with homework, driven her to volleyball practice. She wrote about the moment she'd realized I was going to be collateral damage in her addiction, about choosing to go ahead with the lies anyway because the drugs had made her ruthless and selfish, about the night she'd pawned the ring, wearing my jacket and carrying my ID, and feeling a perverse satisfaction at how perfectly her plan was working. The honesty was brutal. She didn't spare herself or try to minimize her choices. She laid it all out, every calculated decision, every moment she'd had a chance to tell the truth and had chosen to lie instead. By the time I finished reading, it was almost dawn. I sat in my living room, watching the sky lighten, feeling something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the possibility of forgiveness somewhere down the line. A year after everything fell apart, our family gathered for Thanksgiving. It was the first major holiday I'd attended since moving out. The atmosphere was still careful, still fragile, but there was also something new, an honesty that hadn't existed before. We talked about Lily's recovery openly. She shared updates from her sobriety meetings. She talked about the other teenagers she'd met in treatment, kids whose families had either completely abandoned them or enabled them to the point of death. She said she was grateful our family had found a middle path, even though it had been messy and painful. Mom talked about her family therapy sessions, about learning to separate her identity as a mother from her children's choices. Dad talked about his guilt and his process of learning to forgive himself. I talked about my anger and my slow journey toward something that wasn't quite forgiveness, but wasn't complete estrangement either. We were learning to be a family again, but a different family than we'd been. Scarred, honest, careful, but still connected. After dinner, Lily and I ended up on the back porch together. She asked how work was going. I told her about a promotion I'd gotten recently. She congratulated me, and I could tell she meant it. I asked about her plans for college. She said she was thinking about something local, living at home to maintain her support system, maybe studying social work so she could help other kids dealing with addiction. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The person who'd destroyed lives through her addiction wanted to build a career helping others avoid that path. But maybe that's how it worked. Maybe the people best equipped to help were the ones who'd been through hell themselves. 18 months after the truth came out, I got a call from Detective Foster. He asked if I'd be willing to speak with a family going through a similar situation. Their teenage son had accused his older brother of theft, and the older brother had maintained his innocence. Foster suspected addiction was involved, but the family was in denial. He thought hearing my story might help them see the pattern before the damage became irreversible. I agreed. I met with the family, the Williamson parents, and their older son Daniel, who was 26 and looked exhausted. I shared my experience, the accusations, the evidence, the family fracture, but also the discovery, the intervention, the painful recovery. Daniel's mother cried through most of my story. Their father asked questions about how to confront their younger son without destroying him. I told them the truth. It would destroy him temporarily. Confronting addiction always did, but leaving it unaddressed would destroy him permanently. They needed to choose which destruction they could live with. Daniel thanked me afterward, gripping my hand tightly. He said he'd been starting to believe he was crazy, that maybe he had stolen things and just didn't remember. The gaslighting had made him doubt his own sanity. I told him I understood. I gave him my number and told him to call if he needed someone to talk to who'd been through it. He called me 3 times over the next month as his family navigated their crisis. His brother eventually admitted to everything, just like Lily had. Heroin, theft, calculated lies. The family was devastated, but at least they knew the truth. Daniel and I stayed in touch after that. Sometimes people need to know they're not alone in carrying these particular scars. 2 years after everything fell apart, Lily graduated high school. The ceremony was in June, held at the school auditorium. I sat with Mom and Dad, watching Lily walk across the stage in her cap and gown. She'd finished strong, decent GPA, college acceptance letters, 2 years clean. She'd also completed all her community service hours and paid back everything she'd stolen. The ring had been recovered from the pawn shop evidence room after Detective Foster's investigation. It sat in Mom's jewelry box now, but no one talked about giving it to Lily anymore. That particular tradition had died with the lies. After the ceremony, we took family photos. The photographer positioned us carefully, trying to make us look like any other proud family. In some ways, we were. In other ways, we'd never be normal again. But maybe that was okay. Maybe normal was overrated. That evening, we had a small party at the house. Just family and a few of Lily's sober friends from her meetings. She gave a short speech, thanking everyone for their support. When she got to me, she paused. She said she knew I hadn't had to come back. I'd had every right to walk away and never look back. But I'd chosen to stay connected, even when it was painful, even when she didn't deserve it. That choice had meant everything to her recovery. It had given her something to work toward. Someone whose respect she wanted to earn back, even if full forgiveness never came. I told her I was proud of her. The words felt strange in my mouth, like a language I'd forgotten how to speak, but they were true. I was proud of the work she'd done, the person she was becoming. That didn't erase what she'd done. The scar tissue was permanent, but scars meant you'd survived something. Our family had survived, damaged but intact. A few months later, Lily started college at the local university. She declared a major in psychology with a focus on addiction counseling. She attended classes during the day and worked at the bookstore in the evenings. She also started volunteering at Next Gen Wellness Center, the same place where she'd received treatment. She helped run support groups for teenagers early in recovery. Mom told me Lily came alive during those sessions, talking to kids who were where she'd been, scared, defensive, drowning in shame and chemical dependency. She could speak their language because she'd lived it. She could call out their lies because she'd told the same ones. The volunteer coordinator at the center had told Mom that Lily was a natural. She had the right combination of empathy and tough love that the kids responded to. 3 years after everything fell apart, I moved across the state for a better job opportunity. It was a management position at a logistics company, significant pay increase, career advancement. I was excited, but also anxious about putting more physical distance between myself and my family. We'd worked hard to rebuild something functional. Moving felt like risking that progress. But Dr. Laurent told me I needed to live my life based on my own goals, not as a reaction to what had happened. The trauma had taken enough from me. I couldn't let it dictate my future choices, too. So I moved. My parents helped me pack, just like they'd helped me move into my first apartment. Lily came too. She'd asked if she could help, and I'd agreed. We worked side by side, taping boxes and loading furniture. At one point, she asked if I was leaving because of her, because being near the family was too painful. I told her honestly that it was a factor, not the primary factor, but it was there. The memories in this town were complicated. Starting fresh somewhere new felt right for this stage of my life. She nodded and said she understood. Then she asked if we could stay in touch, maybe talk on the phone sometimes or text occasionally. She wasn't asking to be close. She knew we'd never have what we'd had before, but she hoped we could maintain some kind of connection. I said yes, we could try. For the past year, Lily and I have talked on the phone once a month. The conversations are brief and surface level. Updates about work, school, family. We don't talk about what happened unless it comes up organically. Mostly it doesn't. We're building something new, not trying to resurrect what died. It's imperfect and incomplete, but it's honest. Last month, Lily called to tell me she'd been accepted into a master's program for clinical social work with a specialization in addiction treatment. She'd also reached 2.5 years clean. She sounded genuinely happy, something I hadn't heard in her voice since before the drugs. I congratulated her and meant it. She asked if I'd come home for Thanksgiving this year. I said I'd try. I did. Yesterday, I sat at the Thanksgiving table with my family for the second year in a row. The empty chair that had held a photo of our family is gone now. Lily sits in that space. She's earned it through years of consistent effort and maintained sobriety. We're not fixed, we're not healed, but we're here, together, choosing connection over estrangement. That's something. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.